Hi everyone. It's a real pleasure for me to be here today, and I want to thank Eva and Simon very much for inviting me to speak, and it was really interesting to hear the presentations from Louise and Gary, so thank you very much. I'm here today to talk about how to create a global content hub that has impact locally and drives results in every market that the hub is in. I'm going to be talking about that in relation to a project that I've been working on in Sage for the last 8 months, which is Sage Advice. And because of Sage Advice, Sage has just very recently been recognised as one of the top 50 content marketing brands in the world, and one of the top 8 content marketing brands in the technology sector. And very quickly, for anybody who might not be familiar with Sage, we're a global technology company. We're active in over 20 markets and have over 6 million customers worldwide. And very recently, we've launched Sage Advice. So Sage Advice is the global blog platform on sage.com. And the goal of Sage Advice is really to attract, engage and convert a brand new audience to Sage. So it's all about growing our audience and new customer acquisition. Sage Advice is now live in 4 markets. As of last night, we just went live in Spain. So Spain is hot off the presses. And next month we'll be live in Germany. So we'll be live in 5 different markets and 4 languages. And before the end of 2018, we'll be live in 10 markets. So it's a project that is in progress at the moment, and we're launching one by one in each market. I want to give you some context about what's happening at Sage and why we need a global blog hub and what's happening in terms of the digital transformation there. So at the moment, Sage is undergoing a massive project where we're moving all of our individual market websites from their individual country domains onto sage.com. So to give an example, the website that was on sage.fr is now on sage.com. The website that was on sage.es as of last night is now on sage.com. And what we did was we've moved each of those individual markets to a subfolder on sage.com, built a brand new website for them there in a subfolder that's reflective of the language and country for that market. And then we've launched Sage Advice in a blog subfolder on that URL. And I don't want to get into too much details about URLs and all that type of stuff, but it's just important to reflect that's the context and the move. And even at URL structure, we have to have a strategy and think about how we're reflecting the language and the country as we move all those market sites and build a brand new website and content hub on sage.com. So I'm gonna do that thing where somebody tries to give a demo and then it goes really, really bad, but let's see what happens. So Alt-Tab. So this is Sage Advice in the UK. As I said, we're live in...
You just escape out of the PowerPoint.
Oh, sorry.
Hit the escape button.
Okay, and then... There we go. Okay, so thanks, Aoife. So this is Sage Advice in the UK. As I said, we're live in 4 markets, but I'm going to show the UK one for the purposes of the demo. And we have lots of women up on the homepage because we're doing a homepage takeover for International Women's Day tomorrow. So we're trying to focus and feature on the content that's written by women and about women on the homepage at the moment. So here up on the top of the homepage, we have all our featured articles. And the way we run Sage Advice is that in each market that it's live in, we have an editor-in-chief who's present in that market, who knows that market really well, what's happening on the ground that's important to customers there. And they decide what goes on the front of our digital newspaper, Sage Advice, every day. They decide what stories to publish there and what to feature on those featured articles at the top of the homepage. In terms of localization, one of the things that was really important for us was to deliver this hub that those editors-in-chief could use for their market, but that they could localize and make it work for their market as well and allow it to have meaning for their market. So whereas the word Sage Advice is a content brand that we want to grow recognition of around the world, and so on every single Sage Advice, whether it's in France or Spain or Germany, it's called Sage Advice. But because that might not mean very much to the local customer, they might not know who Sage is or what Sage Advice is. In each local market, we have the tagline translated but also localized to give meaning to the individual market. And then as we scroll down further on the homepage, because Sage communicates to a wide customer base in terms of business size, everything from startups to bookkeepers, accountants and larger enterprises. On the homepage, as a user, you can decide what business size you're most aligned with, and you can click, and to see that content, the content on the homepage dynamically changes depending on what business size you've chosen. And if you want, you can change that decision and see different content appear there on the homepage. Moving further down, one of the features that I'm really proud of is the featured authors. Nope, don't have a minute, sorry Sage. So the featured authors are something, again, that is very customised and localised to the local market. So what makes Sage Advice resonate with the local audience is that they need to trust the advice. And that advice needs to be based on experience and expertise of people in the local market that they can identify with. And that's why on the homepage, in each market, the local authors that write the posts, that write and give that advice are featured there. And as a user, as a reader, you can go and learn more about them. And so this is something that's very much localised to each market that Sage Advice is on. And I'll just quickly go back up and go into one of the blog posts. And so in terms of how Sage Advice works as an acquisition engine for Sage, it's your classic content marketing methodology. So we give some information in that blog post, and then either through the blog post or at the end, we offer a content upgrade that the user can choose to learn more about that topic. And by doing so, they'll give their information in a form, and we can subsequently then remarket to them and nurture them. And based on what Gary says, we have to be very careful in terms of that data and making sure that it's all GDPR compliant. But don't worry, Gary, we're on it. It's happening. Other points of localization that were really interesting to me working on Sage Advice was even things down to the social media sharing buttons. So, we wanted to make sure that we included the common social media sharing channels of your Facebook and Twitter and so on, but also those dark social sharing channels. Like, people still like to share on email, and people still like to share in private Slack groups and the like. So we've included that. But for example, when we launch in Germany next month, actually we'll be adding Zing, which is a social sharing channel that's really important in that local market. So again, very much looking to the local market, going on the expertise of the local editor-in-chief and what they're telling us the local customer will want to do there. Just switching back now to the presentation. Here we go. So that's a little bit, just a taster of the features and functionality of Sage Advice. But none of that is of any benefit to the user if the content is not right. If the content is not delivering for them what they need as a user. And the content also needs, and Sage Advice also needs to drive value for Sage. So there has to be that balance between balancing the user needs and our needs as a business. And so to do that, we thought very, very carefully on an editorial strategy for Sage Advice. So what would we actually publish content about on Sage Advice? And this had to be an editorial strategy that was flexible enough to work in every single market. So no matter where we bring Sage Advice to, that the editor-in-chief can use that editorial strategy and it can work and have results for them. And so to arrive at that, we looked at what does our audience care about? What drives them? What motivates them? And to understand what our audience cares about, we had to listen to them. You know, we had to listen to them and look at what they were talking about on social media by doing social media listening. And again, it was important to do that in each market that Sage Advice is going to be in. We also had to look at search insights. So what are they searching for on Google in those different markets? We also had to go and speak to the customers in the individual markets and do surveys and actually get that insight from them. And then we had to do some, self-examination and say, well, actually, what can Sage be the best at? And I think, a lot of companies, when they're publishing on a blog, they publish about a range of topics. But in trying to do that, it's very difficult to be an expert in any one thing. So what Sage is trying to do is trying to be a go-to expert, but only in a particular topic area. So we looked at what Sage could be an expert at and linking that back to the products that we sell, but as a more of a theme. So we're not going to be talking about products on Sage Advice, but we wanted to thematically relate to our product offering so that link is always there. So looking at our product offering, we decided that, expertise around money, management of money in your business, management of people and payments and payroll. These were the things that we could credibly and legitimately give expertise on, and that we could leverage also the expertise of our accountants and partners network to do that as well. So this was an editorial strategy that we were able to bring to each one of those markets, and we're able to say this is what you will be able to publish content about on Sage Advice. But it gives them the flexibility that within the local market, they can go back to this data and use that to make sure that Sage Advice is delivering at a detail level within those teams with what the local user is searching for, what they're talking about on social media, what their needs are, which is all about building their business. So that's where our editorial strategy will deliver. And how this looks in real life, in the real world, an example of a blog post is looking at the audience need. A lot of people in local markets are searching for, they need to send, and this is a small business example. They've just set up their business and they need to send an invoice. And what even goes on an invoice? How do I go about invoicing my customers? So we have a blog post that explains how to do that, how you should go about setting up an invoice, and we offer that content upgrade of an invoice template. So you don't have to buy any software, there's no commitment, you go and you download the invoice template and you're able to go ahead and quickly invoice your customers. So that Sage Advice delivering for the users in this market, it's an invoice template. Maybe that might not be as relevant or resonate as much in another market, so it's up to each individual content manager to decide what resonates in their market. We do have a goal of that each local market that uses Sage Advice uses that 25% of their content comes from a shared resource. So that means that they must get 25% of their content from the global content team that I work on, or from one of their counterparts in one of the other markets. And then we localize and transcreate that content for their market. So that means there's a certain amount of savings and efficiencies that can be got from the people in the US saying, actually, that invoice template would work really well for our market too, and we'll take it and we'll transcreate it and we'll use it in the US. And so at least 25% of content. Now, some markets actually do more than that. Some, the US, for example, actually up to 50% of the content that they use on Sage Advice comes from a shared resource. And the strategy also works for us for the other types of customers that we're targeting. So this is an example of a piece of content from, not for a small business, instead for an enterprise market. So it's a piece of content about improving your supply chain. And again, created for the UK market, but can be localised and reused in other markets if the data and the customer need is reflected in that local market. And then I think in terms of Sage Advice and where we're going next, we want to grow Sage Advice to be much more than a blog. We want to grow it to be a content hub, a destination, a resource for our customers and prospects in those markets. And part of doing that is building out resources, for example, like a glossary. And this might not be the sexiest piece of content you're ever going to see in your life, but it is answering the needs of our prospects who are trying to grow and build their business. They need this advice, they need this information. Here's an example of a glossary term in the USA, one in Spain and one in Germany, so that when somebody Googles what is operating income, that we don't want Sage Advice to just show up number one. We actually want it to show up in that snippet that Google gives, where they give the definition. So it's about answering the queries that the individuals have in the local market to make Sage Advice their go-to source. So as I said, lots done and more to do. I'm going to be live in 10 markets by the end of the year. But I've learned a lot about working with each market and serving the need in each market from the Sage Advice project. And that's everything I have to share today, but we'll welcome your questions.